Hello everyone in Chafin land. Welcome to our next video. This is Germany from the Treaty of Versailles through World War II. So make sure you have your guided notes with you, you have something to write with, and you're ready to go because we are going to get started. So we're going to start by talking about the Treaty of Versailles. You know that this was what happened at the end of World War I, but we need a little bit more information. So the treaty was signed by the French Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau, the British Prime Minister David Lloyd George, the US President Woodrow Wilson, and the Italian Prime Minister Vittorio Orlando. Now, Germany was not allowed to send anyone to represent them, and this treaty weakened Germany militarily, so it weakened their military, it weakened them economically, and it weakened them territorially. And we're going to look at how that happened. So we need to look at the terms of the treaty. So Germany was treated, and this is the best way to remember it, Germany was treated like a brat. And you see that that's in bold and all caps. They were treated like a brat. The rest of Europe believed that Germany had acted like a brat or behaved like a brat, and so they punished them like a brat. And you'll see what I mean by that in just a moment. So the B in brat, they had to take the blame for the war. They had to take the responsibility for all the damage and loss that was caused by the war. R, they had to pay reparations. Reparations are payments to take care of damage and loss in war. So they had to pay for all that damage. And this came to 132 billion gold marks. That would be German currency. And that would be today roughly 269 billion US dollars. They didn't pay it all at once. They had to pay it over a long time. The A in brat is that they had to reduce their army or their military, all of their military. And the T is they had to give up territory. And losing territory meant that they lost their colonies and the people and businesses that were in those colonies. So let's look at all of the things that Germany lost as a result of this. Germany lost 10% of its land. Now remember that a lot of that was colonies. They did lose all of their colonies. They lost 12% of their population because there were people living in those colonies. They lost 16% of their coal fields, which may or may not have been in the colonies, may have been in other areas that they lost. They lost 50% of their iron and steel industry. Again, some of that could have been in the colonies, some of that could have been in their own territory that they lost. We'll look at a map in just a moment. And it lost all of its air force. Remember that they had to reduce their military, their army specifically, but their military. Their air force was particularly deadly in World War I, and so they had to get rid of it entirely. So here's the map that I said we would look at. We have Germany lost, we're going to start over here in the upper left-hand corner. Germany lost all of her colonies. This area here, North Schleswig, was given to Denmark, so it became a part of Denmark. We're going to keep going to the right. Now this, where you have some lines across the yellow here, and so you'll see down here in our key, it says this was territory lost by Germany to the League of Nations. When it just says League, it means League of Nations. So this is Danzig. This was a free city that was run by the League of Nations. We don't have to know a lot about the League of Nations, so I do not worry too much about that. We're going to go down the right-hand side. Poland was given a corridor, like a pathway, a narrow area, to the Baltic Sea. This is the Baltic Sea here. This cut off this state, East Prussia. Remember when we talked about Otto von Bismarck? He was the Chancellor of Prussia. So East Prussia got cut off entirely because Poland was given this way to get to the sea. So East Prussia was cut off from the rest of Germany. It's still a part of Germany. It was part of their territory that they kept, but it was cut off from them. So think about how difficult that might have been. Posen, this was rich farmland here, and it was given to Poland. This area down here also given to Poland. Now, the new government met here in Weimar. So Germany was called the Weimar Republic. We're going to go down to the bottom now. Now, Germany was forbidden to unite with Austria. Remember that they had done that initially in World War I. They were not allowed to do that at all. Now, the Saar coalfields, this small area here, they were given to France for just 15 years. So they could have them for 15 years. Now, this area, this is Alsace-Lorraine is what it's called, Alsace-Lorraine. It was given back to France. France had lost this land to Germany way back before the war in 1871. And then we see this orange area, the Rhineland. This was a demilitarized zone, okay? So nobody could have armed forces in this area. Germany could not, Holland could not, Belgium could not, France could not. So this was a buffer kind of area, like a safe zone. Eupen and Malmedy were given to Belgium. It's this tiny little yellow area here, given to Belgium. So you see that they lost quite a bit. I mean, they still had quite a bit of land, but they lost some significantly important areas. So this is what Europe looked like after 1919, after the war was over. Again, we're seeing some things that Germany had to give up. We're seeing some things that Poland gained. We're seeing some things that Russia gained, which we will talk about. All right, Hitler. So we all know about Adolf Hitler. There he is. But what we need to know about him coming into power in Germany is that before he came into power, the Germans were really desperate. They had lost territory. They had lost colonies. They had lost businesses. They had to pay a lot of money. And they were not doing well, and they were not feeling good about themselves. They didn't have that nationalist feeling. They didn't have that we're the best kind of feeling about Germany. And so they were struggling, and they were really desperate when Hitler came to power. Now, the German people supported Hitler in coming to power, but they didn't exactly elect him. He was appointed to be chancellor. And he represented the National Socialist Party, or the Nazi Party. That's where the word Nazi comes from. You can, if you think about those words, National Socialist Party, it can be broken down to Nazi Party. He promised to strengthen Germany and bring the Germans out of poverty. He started empire building, which they weren't supposed to do, and he started building up the military, which they weren't supposed to do. And this made the other European countries very, very nervous. It made them very uncomfortable. But he also blamed all of the economic problems that Germany was having on the Jews in Germany. He claimed that Jews and other ethnic groups, and we've talked about ethnic groups before, were inferior to Germans, that they were not as good as. And he claimed that Germans were a superior race, like a master race, that Germans weren't a race at all, and that they should lead Europe. And often it's pointed out that the ironic thing is that his claims about the German race, put that in finger quotes because, again, not a real thing, was that they were superior because they were tall and blonde and blue-eyed. And if you look at him, he is not those things. So let's talk about the Holocaust. So in addition to empire building, again, he was not supposed to be doing this. Germany was not allowed. Hitler began a genocide known as the Holocaust. Let's talk about that word genocide. So genocide is the planned killing of an entire group of people. So the Germans forced many Jews. So we know that the Holocaust was about the killing of Jews, but those were not the only people that were killed. Jews, Gypsies, Slavs, remember we talked about Slavic languages, the Slavs, and other groups, people with disabilities, for instance, homosexuals, were put into prison camps, and many of them were killed, as you know. Approximately 6 million Jews were killed, and that is horrific and terrible. But there were another 2 to 3 million people from other groups who were killed as well. So that name at the top there, Dachau, and that's how you say it, Dachau. It was the first concentration camp in Germany. They had these concentration camps, these prison camps, these death camps in various places, but this was the first one that was in Germany. Now this sculpture, and if you look at it closely, you can tell that it's supposed to be people. You can see hands and feet and heads. This is a memorial to the victims of Dachau, a memorial to the people who were killed there. Many of you may have seen images somewhere of people who were in the concentration camps. They were, in many cases, skin and bones. That's why the sculpture looks this way. And people say, never, never, never again. Okay, so this first image, the one on the left, has the words never again in various languages. Hebrew, French, English, German, and I think Russian. So that's another memorial. The one on the right is a memorial garden type. It is specifically for the Jews. You see the menorah. This is a candelabra that's used to celebrate Hanukkah. You can see, if you look really closely on this circle, that there's the 6-pointed star that they made Jews wear. That's known as the Star of David. Down here at the bottom is a tablet shape. Again, that comes from Jewish scripture about the 10 Commandments. But we have to remember so that we never, never do this again. And sadly, there have been several other genocides in the world since this time, not perpetrated on Jews, not directly connected to Jewish people. But there have been other groups of people who they have tried to wipe out their entire ethnic group, for instance. And so there have been other genocides. So we clearly haven't learned the lesson that we never, never need to let this happen again. All right, so we're going to fast forward to 1939. So in 1939, Germany signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union. Now, this is not exactly an alliance. This is, we won't invade you if you won't invade us. This is not, we'll come to your help if you need it, like an alliance. This is more, you don't bother us, we won't bother you. And right after that, Germany invaded Poland, which was fine. The USSR, the Soviet Union, they occupied the eastern part of Poland, called Eastern Poland, and then they annexed Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And if we go back to our map, so this map, so Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, these Russia took for their own. To annex does not mean that they conquered them, that they made them colonies. It means that they simply said, this belongs to us now. We claim this. Nobody gets a vote. No, there's nothing that goes on. They just say, we're bigger and we take over. They're ours. And this was the beginning of World War II. Germany invading Poland, the Soviet Union annexing these other countries and taking over part of Poland. That began World War II. Now in 1941, and I think you guys know this, that in 1941, you don't know this part. The Soviet Union, they joined the Allied forces. They joined the Allied side after Germany invaded them. Remember, they had a non-aggression pact just 2 years before. They said, we won't invade you, we won't bother you if you don't bother us. And then Germany invaded them. And so the Soviet Union said, we're not going to do this. We're just going to join the other side. And so they did. But what I think that you know about 1941 is that the U.S. entered the war after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in December of 1941. And now the world was at war again. So we're fast forwarding from 1941 to April 30th, 1945. Now, this is from a book called The Death of Hitler's Germany that was written in 1954. So it's not a primary source. It was a secondary source. It was written by John Toland. We're going to read some quotes. The first one comes from a book called The Death of Hitler's Germany, written in 1954. So it's a secondary source. It was not written at the time. It's written by G. Blond. And then another part of this comes from a book called The Last 100 Days, which was by John Toland. It was also written after the fact. It was written in 1966. So these are not primary sources. But I want you to listen to this, and I'm going to kind of explain some things as we go along. On April 30th, 1945, as Russian troops fought to within yards of his subterranean bunker — subterranean is underground bunker — Adolf Hitler put a pistol to his head, pulled the trigger, and closed the curtain on the Third Reich. So this just means he killed himself, and that was kind of the end of Hitler's reign. Before his death, Hitler he chose, in this case, Admiral Karl Donitz as his successor with orders to continue the fighting. So he chose Donitz. He said, you are going to carry on what I've been doing, and what I want you to do is continue to fight. Hitler was unaware that the German surrender had already begun. On the day before his death, so on April 29th, all German troops in Italy laid down their arms. They laid down their weapons. On May 4th, just 4 days after his death, German forces in Holland, Denmark, and northwest Germany surrendered to British Field Marshal Montgomery. On May 6th, Donitz authorized — remember, Donitz is the guy that Hitler handpicked and said, you keep doing what I've been doing. On May 6th, so just 6 days after his death, Donitz authorized General Alfred Jodl to conclude an armistice agreement with General Eisenhower. Okay, pause. Conclude an armistice agreement means surrender. Surrender to Eisenhower. So 7 days before, we're going to assume — it just says before his death, so we don't know exactly when he asked Donitz to do it. 6 or 7 days before, he had said to Karl Donitz, Hitler had said to Karl Donitz, you keep fighting. And then he took his own life. 6 or 7 days later, Donitz said, go surrender. The Germans wanted a separate peace with the Allied troops in the West in order to continue their battle with the Russians in the East. Okay, so let me just make sure we understand that. They wanted to surrender to and make peace with the Allied troops in the West, so the US and the UK, France, those groups. They wanted to kind of make peace with them, but they wanted to continue to fight Russia. Eisenhower would have none of it. He said, absolutely not. He ordered the Germans to surrender unconditionally. Unconditionally is exactly what it sounds like, without any conditions. You have to surrender, and not I surrender but. Okay? So he ordered the Germans to surrender unconditionally the next day. The Germans acquiesced, they gave in, signing the surrender document on May 7th in the French city of Reims. The cessation, the stopping of the fighting, took effect at 11:01 p.m. on May 8th. The Russians insisted that a separate signing take place in Berlin on May 9th. Okay, let me explain that. So remember, Russia and Germany, they had been friends, sort of. They had, signed this non-aggression pact, and they said, you don't bother me, I won't bother you. You don't invade me, I won't invade you. And then Germany invaded them. And so Russia did not trust Germany. And Germany, it sounds like Germany was not trustworthy, right? They had said, oh, we want to make peace with everybody. We want to keep fighting Russia. So Russia did not trust them. And so they said, it's not good enough to sign this surrender in Rems. We want to show up, and we want to meet with you in Berlin, in your capital city. We want to see you sign it. You have to look us in the eye and sign it. So after 6 catastrophic years, so from 1939 to 1945, the war in Europe was over. So this is an image of General Alfred Jodl. He's the man in the middle, obviously, with the pen. He is signing the document of unconditional German surrender. And the war is over. You can go back and review the video if you need to make sure you've gotten all your notes. And always bring your questions to class, because I want to be sure you understand. Please remember, always and never, never forget that you are seen, you are known, you are cared for, and you are loved.